Arguably the toughest man in the Marvel Universe, Frank Castle has had 4 live-action iterations, each being a product of their generation. We have an 80s action schlock, a gritty crime drama, a brutal violent pulp, and a long-form psychological realism piece that was built for a streaming platform. With 4 very different representations, showcasing 4 very different elements of the Punisher, each representation is also reflecting a different era of filmmaking. Given how different these portrayals are, surely there has to be one that reigns supreme, one that punishes harder. Let's begin by defining who the Punisher is as a character. Frank Castle is one of Marvel's most stubborn anti-heroes, in both real-world longevity and in-canon personality. Unlike his peers, if you want to call them that, within the heroing world who fight for justice, truth, or any other noble cause, Frank fights for something much darker: punishment. Frank Castle doesn't believe in redemption, mercy, or second chances. He is a force of nature. He is inevitable. Criminals aren't to be rehabilitated, they are to be eradicated. The Punisher, like most anti-heroes, first appeared as a villain within the pages of 1974's The Amazing Spider-Man issue 129. Originally a gun for hire with a strict moral code of taking out only criminals, this base then informed a rich backstory as the character then gained popularity. See, Frank Castle wasn't always the Punisher. Frank at one point in time was Captain Frank Castle, a brave and decorated Marine serving in the Vietnam War. When he got back, he attempts to readjust to family life, being supported by his wife, Maria, and his 2 children, Lisa and Frank Jr. The Castle family decide to take a trip to Central Park on what should have been a very peaceful family picnic. When the family then witnesses a mob execution, they are then fired upon. This leaves the family riddled with bullets and Frank as the only survivor. He did try to follow the rules. He turned to the justice system, trusting the judge to deliver punishment. All that was delivered upon was corruption, loopholes, and the Castle's killers walking free. If the law wouldn't deliver punishment, Frank would. From here forward, Frank Castle became something darker. He was no longer a husband or even a man. He was a soldier in an endless war, a force of vengeance with no endgame. Frank's story isn't just brutality, it's tragedy. His war will never end. No matter how many criminals he kills, there will always be more. He cannot win this war, and Frank knows this. Compare him to characters like Batman, who lost his parents and then went on to build a new family. Frank rejects any chance at moving on. He also had opportunities to find peace, but he refuses them all. Because unlike heroes who strive to make the world better, Frank doesn't believe in a better world. He believes only in punishment. So from this basis, what makes a good representation of the Punisher? Number 1, he is defined by his origin. Frank is not just motivated by revenge, however. Sure, it's what started his journey, but he is a wildfire that refuses to be suppressed. He has a complete severance from a normal life. He will not stop. Number 2, his strict moral code. If you hurt the innocent, you deserve death. He has no tolerance for crime or corruption. However, he will absolutely not stand harming the innocent. His violence is targeted and purposeful. Bringing us to our next criteria, number 3, he is a highly trained US Marine and Special Forces operative with skills in urban warfare, marksmanship, hand-to-hand combat, and demolitions. In a universe where he regularly needs to compete with superhumans, the Punisher is inhumanly focused and gifted when it comes to taking out his target. And lastly, his endless war and isolation. His war cannot be won, only fought. He has no teams, no sidekicks, and no allies. Even his relationships, like that with the Thunderbolts, Daredevil, or even Microchip, are strained and temporary. Let's take this criteria and look at our first live-action version of the Punisher, Dolph Lundgren's 1989 film, The Punisher. Now, I love Lundgren as an actor. It's hard to launch the following criticisms of the film knowing how much this man has pioneered his genre of film, but I will be honest, I'm not a fan of this movie. Yes, there's some brutal action scenes. Yes, his family are killed off at the start, and the movie reminds you of this pretty much adequately, but it's just so generic. For one, his family death was an intentional mob hit that was designed to take out Frank Castle as he was an undercover police detective. So we're already messing with a perfect origin. He also doesn't wear the classic Punisher skull, and overall the character doesn't have the same moral code as the Punisher we know and love. He actually teams up with Franco, the mob boss who ordered the hit on his family, to take out the Yakuza. Yes, he promises that Franco will die after they take out the Yakuza, and he delivers that promise, but comic book Frank would just kill Franco the second they met eyes. Also, his beef with the Yakuza is weak, and his characterization of hunting gangs does not live up to his comic book influences, making this movie feel unearned. In the end, this character is hardly the Punisher and is just a copy-paste 80s action movie. Next up, we have Thomas Jane's 2004 movie, The Punisher. Now, I'm not going to be counting the YouTube short called Dirty Laundry with Thomas Jane in it, purely because it's literally called the Bootleg Universe, and it isn't canon. I still recommend watching it if you got a spare 10 minutes, but Punisher takes way too long to decide to start punishing, so even if I was to look at it, I wouldn't be rating it high either. But I will say it feels more like The Punisher than his actual movie version does. If I was to say anything nice about the 2004 Punisher movie, it would be that the fight with the Russian is pretty fun. Sure, Thomas Jane seems sassy, having a couple moments in the fight where he literally cocks an eyebrow at the Russian, and his fighting style is not as cold or brutal as a Punisher we would like, but it's a fun scene nonetheless. My criticisms of this piece seem to take a page out of Lundgren's book. They change the origin again. Frank is a detective, and the mob organize a hit on his whole family, and by whole family I mean parents, cousins, kids, everyone. It's almost cartoonish. And from there, it's another revenge film. That's why this doesn't work, because in the comics, Castle's motivations come from a random senseless act of mob violence. This reinforced his war on crime as an ideology, not just personal revenge. Frank Castle's war on crime should feel universal, not personal. Well, as not personal as killing someone's family can be, because there's two elements at play here that seem to have been switched around. The act of Frank's family being shot down is meant to feel like a personal loss to the character, committed by an indifferent system of crime and corruption. This scene had a massacre the levels of the Uchiha clan and was also a personal grudge against Frank. There's even a subplot in this movie where Frank tries to gaslight the main villain into thinking his wife is cheating on him with his main henchman. Frank is meant to be a military tactician, not a jealous ex. Last bit of criticism I'll launch Tom Jane's way is that his portrayal of the Punisher seems more brooding and passive rather than an unstoppable war machine. He spends a lot of the time sulking and drinking rather than actually punishing criminals. A lot of his fights are lacking the military discipline and tactful expertise that we need. At least they actually have him wearing the skull shirt in this movie though. Now let's get to the meat of this video. The only real competition here was between the late great Ray Stevenson's 2008 Punisher Warzone movie and Jon Bernthal's Punisher series. Now both of these representations are near perfect. It's hard to pick a winner, but if I was to make any argument why this may be an unfair fight, it would be that we have spent so much more time with Bernthal than anyone else. Just to maybe recapture why Ray Stevenson is still in the race, however, let's revisit our points. Both Jon Bernthal and Stevenson have great scenes showcasing their origins. Both were random acts of violence, as we see the classic family death in the park scene when Stevenson's Punisher is visiting his family's grave. Now I will deduct some points from Bernthal for this, however. Yes, we have the nightmare sequences, which are amazing, and yes, his war started because Castle believed it was random mob violence, which is how the Punisher works best. But it is revealed to both audience and Castle that the mob violence was just a cover-up for an organized hit from Colonel Ray Schoonover and Operation Cerberus leader William Rawlins to deter Captain Frank Castle from exposing their war crimes in the Middle East. In my opinion, this weakens Bernthal's depiction of the Punisher's origin, as now his enemy isn't crime, but it's deep state operations, shady government conspiracies. It definitely muddies the waters. Whereas we have Stevenson right over here. We have that flashback by the grave. Later on, he has an interaction with a child that he saves and his own child's belongings that he has been keeping safe. It's just perfect. Okay, our second point, his strict moral code. Now, I actually enjoy when characters have a plot that does stray from their moral code to a point. We need our characters to go through something that challenges their ethos. To be honest, both characters have had something like this happen. Stevenson accidentally kills a cop who was undercover in a mob sting. Now, it's not like the Punisher likes cops. Actually, in the comics, he is specifically against the cops, going as far to tell a police officer that if he wanted a role model, to look to Captain America and not him. Because if cops did their job, well, there wouldn't be a need for the Punisher. But he also doesn't kill cops unless they're corrupt. Stevenson, after killing his cop, almost hangs up the Punisher mantle. This is a large part of this movie and the turmoil he goes through with this decision. Whereas Bernthal has his discourse with Daredevil and the lawyer gang, we have the classic argument of the rooftop scene, almost directly ripped out of the comics. The only bit that I don't enjoy is that he let the Murdoch lawyers try to get him free, to which he only throws the case so that he can get close to Wilson Fisk in prison. I just don't think Castle would entertain any of this. However, if the argument stopped here, then this win goes to Bernthal, as on paper, the Punisher throwing a court case to get locked up and put near more criminals to punish is a lot more in character than killing an undercover cop. But there is one scene where Stevenson showcases the Punisher's strict moral code that I just don't think we've had all throughout the streaming show's runtime. We have a showdown between the crime family Castle has been hunting the entire movie. We have the detective who's been trying to put Castle behind bars, and the family of the slain cop under siege in their family home. Castle has successfully saved the family. He was literally holding a child in his arms. One of the main henchmen of the crime family is sitting at the dining room table as his peers have escaped, and the detective is about to arrest him. Any other hero would consider this the end of the conflict. The police officer is about to arrest the bad guy, and the innocents have been saved. But that doesn't matter to the Punisher. Without hesitation, as soon as the opportunity arises, he blasts a giant hole in the unarmed henchman's head with a shotgun. There are children present. The cop that was trying to arrest him is now the leading witness. None of this matters because the Punisher has punished. Now our third criteria is tactical genius. Looking back to Stevenson's Warzone, this is the most tactical Punisher we have. He is brutal, cold, methodical. There's one scene that I want to point to, that being Castle's assault on Don Casser's party that opens the movie. And I think this is my main issue with Bernthal's Punisher. He doesn't really plan many fights. We get the sniper shot across country lines at the start of episode 1, season 1 of The Punisher, and a couple of the skirmishes he has in the second season of Daredevil. But come on, compared to that of Punisher Warzone, we have Stevenson plan an assault with multiple siege tactics. Yes, it's over the top. There was absolutely no need for him to hang upside down from that chandelier, but this is also the same guy who regularly fights Spider-Man. And that's what I want to see, a superhuman effort in killing a mob family. Bernthal mainly just shouts, runs in guns blazing, engaging in some crazy cool hand-to-hand, but there is no planning to 90% of what he does. Some of his best fights, like the prison scene, are in self-defense. And as it is a streaming show, the slow pace of Bernthal's world just makes it feel like a crime drama at times. We want something over the top, gritty, and hyper-violent. My last point on my list is his isolation, his endless war. Now, they both have allies, but by the end of Warzone, Castle's only real allies is his strenuous relationship with the police. Bernthal's Castle has allies everywhere. He isn't so much isolated as he is just a loner, and yes, there is a distinction. Even when Stevenson's Punisher is getting along with other characters, he really isn't. The way Stevenson plays his isolation is just so much more effective than Bernthal's. The Punisher should look like he's about to clock you at any given moment. And Stevenson somehow balances this while still looking like he's on the verge of tears. He carries his pain with him at all times and this look behind his eyes, while balancing a rigid intimidation to all around him, just reminding the audience that his fuel still is burning hot. He won't stop. He is still in pain. He is fighting his one-man war at all times. Bernthal has moments of respite. He is being moody in an apartment, or he is on the run and pretending to do his best as a wrecker, or chatting up a girl at a bar. Stevenson looks like his family got gunned down yesterday at all times. His isolation is pure and honest. He wouldn't be seen dead moving on with his life in any way, and I swear Bernthal just starts every season like that. If you still aren't 100% convinced that Stevenson edges out Bernthal, Punisher Warzone's Jigsaw shits all over Bernthal's Jigsaw. Billy in the Netflix series is still hot, even with the scars. Warzone's Jigsaw is grotesque. And while we're talking about looks, Stevenson just looks more like the Punisher. Again, Bernthal is just too hot. Yes, his nose looks to be broken, and yeah, for sure he looks like a brawler, but the Punisher needs to look like a war dog, just beating the shit at all times. A little bit ugly, to be honest, and Stevenson looks ripped straight out of the comics. In the end, it is two amazing portrayals, but if we're asking ourselves which is the more brutal, more honest to the comics, and just a fun ride, I've got to give it to Stevenson. But hey, Bernthal has the opportunity to do something that no other Punisher has had the chance to do before. He can play in the Marvel Cinematic sandbox. Some of the coolest Punisher moments is watching how he clashes with the rest of his verse. Like when there is a wake for the villain Stiltman at the popular villain meeting place, the Bar with No Name, in Punisher War Journal Volume 2, Issue 4. Spidey comes by to pay his respects because he genuinely doesn't want his villains to be killed. Wait for Spidey to leave, and it's revealed that the Punisher was pretending to be the bartender and just blows everyone up anyway. Another story similar to that of some gun guys taking on the Sentry in the Thunderbolts movie has the Punisher doing the exact same thing, only this time alone, as he tries to assassinate Norman Osborn on a world stage, a god versus a stubborn prick with a gun. Or when he steals War Machine's armor to finally bring peace to the Middle East, only to get in conflict with the entire Avengers lineup after trying to bring that same justice back to American soil against Hydra. This story ends with Castle being arrested and Nick Fury gloating that he won, to which Castle says, 24 prison guards were killed by Hydra and rioting convicts, Ghost escaped, Baron Zemo escaped, the Supreme Commander is still alive, and you consider tonight a win? That is why I am not on your team. And when we get stories like that, I'll concede and admit that Bernthal has beaten Ray Stevenson's masterpiece, Punisher Warzone. If you want my recommendations for good Punisher reading material, look up any of the following. Jason Aaron's Punisher Max Kingpin from 2009, Matthew Rosenberg's The Punisher Volume issues 218 to 228 from 2016. These are the issues where he's wearing the War Machine armor. Any of Punisher Warzones, either the 1992 version, the 2008 version, or the 2012s, although I do have a soft spot for 2012s. And lastly, any Punisher story written by Garth Ennis. The guy just understands the character. Read those and watch all these movies. They're all worthy of a watch, and come to your own decision.